All right, we will call to order the work session of the Kent County Board of Commissioners for August 13th. It is 11 minutes after 10. I believe the first item on the agenda, well, we'll move it to the first item on the agenda, is public comment. Thank you. The second item on the agenda is public comment. Is anybody that wishes to speak to the board on the work session on DPW this morning before we get started? All right, I see none. We will move to item 3. That is the meat of the meeting, the DPW Strategic Review Work Session. I guess I'll give it to Al to kick it off, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Get my mic on.
So, gosh, I don't remember when we started this journey, but the decision was made, especially after our partner in the Sustainable Business Park project, that relationship didn't work out. Basically, in my way of thinking, they imploded. But we decided to put a stake in the ground. Our Public Works department, since I think 1962, has gone through some definite phases. One, when we think of Vern Ehlers, who is the first picture on the wall back there, who became a state senator and a congressman. When he was on the Public Works board.
He's the fourth one with the badge.
Oh, I see the fourth one?
With the
Oh, the
awesome
scientist.
jacket.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You're right. The 70s appropriate jacket.
And the
Indeed.
Rockets.
And the Rockets, yeah. And many of us knew him. But he had a passion to not have Kent County Commissioners be put in the position of creating another landfill. And so that's when the county started to develop plans and ultimately ended up as being one of the only places in the country to have a landfill, incinerator facility, and also recycling, full-on recycling. And so really, the Sustainable Business Park represents another stake in the ground. And when that development relationship didn't work out, the DPW, the BPW, and the Board of Commissioners decided to launch a very significant study, seeing this as an inflection point in the history of where we're going, not only with future of Sustainable Business Park, but also, even more importantly, revisiting the governance model again. And also looking at strategy for the future, looking at the assets. And the study really looked at 4 different models of organizing the Department of Public Works in the future. One being keeping it the way it is, one making it a full-on county department, one making it full authority, and then the other would be sale of the assets. After a good amount of study and a lot of questions and discussion, the Board of Public Utilities did vote to begin the journey of pursuing a full authority model. And so today, we have Raftelis, Jonathan with Raftelis here with us today. He's going to give a little bit more abridged version of the report than what the Board of Public Works heard. And then we'll start discussion with commissioners to talk about where we go from here.
Before we hand it to Jonathan, I didn't know if we want to just kind of make sure we don't like bury the lead and just skip to the end and say what the Board of Public Works has recommended and then kind of walk through why. I don't know, maybe I'll call on the chair of the Board of Public Works to give a brief summary.
Great. Thank you, Chair Green. I appreciate that. So the Board of Public Works, we have a fantastic board. We have very well thought out individuals that were placed and appointed on that board for a lot of their technical expertise. We have two members. Again, I'm trying to set this up, so I apologize for being a little long-winded on this. We have Mayor Kepley out of Kentwood, very well versed. We have Greg Madura, a township supervisor in Alpine Township. He's been a fantastic addition and is really grasping this and understanding it, and with a lot of credibility to the townships. Commissioner Merchant is on there as well, again, trying to reach out to the townships, so I think they really felt they were unrepresented over the last many years, so some good representation there. We have Commissioner Pakla, Commissioner Steck, myself, and our Drain Commissioner are all members on there as well. So we have a great group of individuals that are most of them are high intellect on that board. And I'm saying, I'm just leading that group. So I was hoping I'd get some laughs on that, so thank you. But again, it is a very well thought out group. And, you know, we're really kind of excited where this is gonna lead. I think we ruled out some items or some of the different, ways that we could go that, you know, our recommendation is to pursue that, the authority model. But that is ultimately gonna be this board's decision. So starting to understand everything that we're doing and digging into this is really important. I think this probably settles once and for all the direction that we're gonna go in DPW. I think that if we're going to an authority model, that we are going to be diverting trash. I mean, that's ultimately where I see it going. If we're going this model, that's what we're doing. So for once and for all, that's where the direction they're heading and, or that board would be heading. We have to work out so many more details. We talked about this could be a year process, and that would be at the earliest. You know, this is probably closer to a year and a half, 2-year process. And we want all of your engagement to really understand this thing. And I don't think this particular item is going to be a right or left thing. I really don't. I think the information that will be provided over the next, you know, from today to the next year, year and a half is going to make it really clear for all of us. And I think, I think we're at a good start. So, and Jonathan, I really appreciate your report, your help. Your group's been fantastic. And I've heard nothing but good things from everybody that's been involved with the information you've been providing. So again, just really try to be informed. There's a lot here. So
Thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Chair Green.
Jonathan, thank you. You appreciate that. DPW Chair Burrell, so please, tell us, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, it's very good to be with you all this morning. As your colleagues mentioned, my name is Jonathan Ingram. I'm a vice president with Ralph Tellis. We're a local government and utility consulting firm. We work pretty much exclusively with city and county governments. We work nationwide, do a lot of work with solid waste departments, authorities, and everything in the gamut. So, you know, you know, the preamble that your colleagues have articulated, you know, our goal today is really to share with you a meaningful update in terms of what we've learned as part of this process. What we believe are firm conclusions that you all can consider as you start to evaluate as a board and ultimately as a community what the best path forward is for your Board of Public Works. This is really the analytical foundation that we're sharing with you today, right, to give you that strong baseline. You know, as your colleague, Mr. Burrell mentioned, it's a really long, it's an extensive process in terms of determining the various ins and outs, but we have a strong sense of the implications for you all to consider. So in terms of the agenda today, I'll orient you a little bit in terms of project overview and approach, although that's already been covered. We'll spend a fair amount of time talking about the alternative approaches. So as your county administrator mentioned, we really looked at 4 alternatives. We'll share the details and the key conclusions associated with that analysis. If you're the type of person who likes to read a technical memo, there's a memo that provides the detail. You can slide it under your pillow if you're having a hard time falling asleep. So, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the DPW board's discussion. So obviously, through this process, we've had a number of touch points with the board as well as the Board of Public Works, as well as some of you on this board as well as stakeholders. And certainly those folks will talk about the context, but I'll give you some sense of what we heard in those conversations and talk through next steps, and just as importantly, how those next steps really need to include meaningful and consistent interaction and engagement with you all as a board to plot a course forward. So in terms of our overall project and approach, you know, I think, you know, really this has been articulated. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but really the fundamental question is, and the fundamental challenge with respect to public works operations, it's a highly technical operation that requires long-term considerations and long-term investments, right? So that means, and there are also significant long-term risks and liabilities with respect to environmental considerations, right? That requires a long-term viewpoint, and one of the challenges with the existing structure as it's laid out, there's a split authority between both the Board of Commissioners and the Board of Public Works. Board of Public Works really takes responsibility for that day-to-day policy initiative and really develops the technical expertise as board members to make really strong decisions. Meanwhile, the Board of Commissioners has less direct engagement, but has a critical role in large policy considerations, policy, capital investments, those kinds of things. That dual accountability structure can create some challenges in terms of both identifying, vetting, and communicating alternatives, but really reaching decision points within the political cycle, right? So that's really the fundamental challenge. So our task is, all right, what are the options that maybe exist to bridge some of those gaps and solve some of the challenges with the current approach? High level, our process was, we've been engaged in this process for several months. Heavily focused initially on data review. There's lots of data to review. We spent a fair amount of time looking at your financial information, your regulatory information, really doing a deep dive into particular statutes and those things that are relevant to you all as a community. We also spent some time in stakeholder engagement. So having conversations with important voices from townships, from your municipalities, from representations on the board, business community, your private haulers. What's important to those folks in the process, and what are the most important considerations? And there are a few big conclusions. One, there was a broad consensus that there's not a ton of interest in creating another landfill, right? So I'm sure that's not a surprise to folks. We heard that from multiple vantage points. Folks are interested in stability in the program. Many folks are interested in making sure that there is a consistent attention toward diversion within the municipality, and also looking for parity between your rural areas and as well as your urban areas. So multiple perspectives, but general alignment around the possibility or the need for there to be an adjustment or an improvement in the current governance model and structure. In terms of the governance alternative analysis, we really spent a lot of time both in the legal framework, doing benchmarking, best practice analysis, and looking at how other counties of similar size and scale perform this work nationwide. So we have experience. Many of those folks are our clients as well, so we were able to kind of dig a little bit deeper. But again, really understanding the specific nuance to give you all alternatives and potential implications. So in terms of the alternatives that were assessed, again, the county administrator articulated these. The first is to maintain current operations, right? And at first that seems like there's really no change. But there really is a change, and there are some fundamental challenges with maintaining the current operations, which we'll articulate. The second option is, could we just make Public Works another county department, just like all your other county departments? The third option, of course, is pursuing that independent authority model. And the fourth is a system sale, so monetizing those assets. What I'll spend some time with today, again, not going too far into the weeds, but what are the key things that you all as policymakers need to know relevant to each of those options as you start to consider the path forward. So in terms of maintaining current operations, really, there's really no fundamental change in the day-to-day delivery of the service, right? So all of your current employees would be retained under that model, so there's no real employee impacts. The governance structure would remain unchanged. So Board of Public Works would oversee the day-to-day operations. You all, as a board, would maintain that general legislative authority. The county administrator would have limited oversight and authority. One of the main challenges with this approach is the environmental liabilities, particularly related to your Superfund sites, as well as those things that are unanticipated. We all know about the conversation with respect to PFAS and the degree to which regulations are ever evolving in the category of PFAS. Those are considerations that have significant liabilities and impacts on the county, and making sure that there is a consistent role, and that is critical. The enterprise fund structure remains, so those who maybe are listening from home, the enterprise fund essentially means revenue fully funds the cost of operations. In other words, it's not general fund supported from county operations. Flow control, this is a process that you all went through essentially to direct all county waste into county facilities. That would be maintained, right? And that really is a critical financial backbone, to the long-term sustainability of the operation, as well as alternative approaches going forward. So no workforce or disruption costs. This is obviously relatively straightforward. The challenge is this does nothing to solve the problems that you all have been experiencing and are looking to solve. So that is really the fundamental challenge there. Again, I've hit this at a high level, but the dual appointments, that's going to maintain some of the accountability challenges. So high level, that's the overview of the current operations. So in terms of moving to a full county department, there's a number of critical implications associated with that approach. So the first is the county administrator essentially, or their designee, gains full authority over the operation. Okay, so essentially the Board of Public Works would be dissolved. All staff would be retained as county employees. Rate setting, contract authority, capital decisions fully shift within the structure that your county administrator currently has for all other departments, meaning you all, as the Board of Commissioners, maintain that budget authority, approval authority. Everything essentially rests with you all, okay? Flow control is retained, which is positive. And then there are some administrative and legal costs for implementation, but relatively low. It's really about ordinance changes, moving through the process, that kind of thing. There's some challenges with span of control. Again, it's a highly technical department. This would bring that technical department under the responsibility and authority of the county administrator. There's some challenges there. Limited financial impact on this alternative, and again, a few costs for legal review, but not significant, I would say, within the overall scale of operations. To move to a full county department, it would require a 2/3 vote of the Board of Commissioners. So this would essentially eliminate that dual control ambiguity, and then the Public Works Director would essentially transition to report either directly to the county administrator or their designee, likely a deputy county administrator, over the long term. So this is probably the fastest way, the one with the least implementation challenges and obstacles to kind of create that unified governance and accountability structure. County administrator, again, gains that oversight. Public Works becomes subject to countywide HR. Now, one of the challenges with the current model, and one of the potential benefits, frankly, of moving to an authority, is there are specialized positions that require specialized classifications. There are some constraints, I think, within the existing structure in terms of recruitment and retention for critical personnel. Those challenges aren't solved with this alternative. Those compensation challenges will remain. Some one-time implementation costs, but very limited, and limited to no long-term financial disruption. Okay? The third option is to move to an independent authority. So under this alternative, DPW would be reconstituted as an independent authority. Now, under the current framework within the state, your current statutory framework, you would need a municipal partner to be able to execute an authority. However, you all have a history of getting special legislation passed, which you did with your airport authority, to be able to do it independently. There's alternative from a legislative perspective, so that you all as a county could execute this independently. Staff would transition to the authority employment. In other words, they would no longer be county employees. There would be a transition arrangement to roll those folks under. It would require renegotiating collective bargaining agreements. Those employee moves are relatively complex, but not insurmountable by any stretch. You would have a single governing body that essentially replaces the role and functionality of both the Board of Public Works and the Board of Commissioners, okay? Open Meetings Act, FOIA obligations, all those things continue. It remains a public authority, a public agency. It's subject to the same laws and regulations that you all are with respect to representation as well as public meetings. Flow control is retained. So one of the positive alternatives with respect to the authority model is you're able to maintain that financial backbone. And one of the challenges, or one of the things that would be necessary, not a challenge, not an insurmountable challenge by any stretch, is internal staff functions would need to be created. So human resources, IT, those sorts of things. Currently, the Board of Public Works, the Department of Public Works contributes an annual amount to the county to provide many of those internal services. Those agreements would need to be developed to maintain those services, or new staff would need to be developed to be able to create those functions internally within the organization. Again, those collective bargaining agreements would need to be renegotiated with the authority as the employer rather than the county. This just highlights, we've done an assessment just looking at departmental operations of what it would take from a staffing perspective to replicate those internal service functions. We'd identified a total of 5 folks at about $621,000 with a fully loaded benefit cost. Again, this is an estimate at this point. There are other arrangements. There's contractual arrangements. There's all sorts of sort of alternatives to provide these services, but this gives a sense to replicate the current service level. There's also additional expenses associated with contract services, technology investment, and IT infrastructure that would need to come with creating an authority. Again, relatively modest investments, but investments nonetheless. There's several key conclusions with respect to the authority. So this is one of the most common models that is utilized throughout the country to manage regional operations similar to you all, with deep technical expertise requirements as well as long-term financial considerations and investments, right? There are currently 9 active authorities in Michigan, but what I will say is, looking nationally, how Kent County is viewed from a national perspective in the solid waste industry is really positive. You all do a lot more than most of your Michigan peers with respect to authority. So when we look at a comparable authority, we really have to look outside of Michigan to look at a group that has the same size, scale, and technical reliance on staff to be able to reach the diversion goals that you have historically reached within the county. So it's very positive, very well regarded within the industry. The independent authority provides the greatest operational flexibility. So procurement, compensation, capital planning becomes independent of the county process, although you all as a county and you as a county commission would still have fundamental influence over board structure. When you talk about, how you define what the board looks like, there are lots of variations and lots of alternatives, right, that could be included. Some authorities have boards that are entirely comprised of board of county commission members. Sometimes it's technical experts, board members, representatives from municipalities, representatives from key stakeholder groups, ex officio members. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of the board design of an authority that gives you the ability to really create diverse voices within that group. It would also allow you to continue as an authority to leverage the county's outstanding bond rating, right? So being able to maintain that relationship, the details and specifics of how that's arranged with respect to ownership of assets would be one of the specific implementation considerations to articulate. But you all, as an authority, would be able to continue to benefit from that, which translates into meaningful savings as your authority issues debt down the road. This does have higher transition complexity. As Commissioner Burrell indicated, having a strong planning time and execution time and really understanding the specific nuance and implementation time frame, this is harder to do. It is very doable, though. And frankly, you all have gone through a similar process with other authorities. It's definitely something that you all can execute. There is that legislative precedent for a standalone authority again. So I think, you could choose to create an authority with municipal partners that has advantages and implications. You could choose to move through a path through the legislature to have a unilateral authority to implement that authority. Again, some different alternatives there. System sale is the fourth option. So one of the things that we heard in our conversation is what would it mean if we just got out of the business, okay? And there's a number of sort of key implications associated with the system sale. So under this model, the county would essentially exit as the role of solid waste operator, all right? Under this scenario, one of the implications would be staff transition. So if you all get out of the business, where do staff go? In some cases, you can negotiate transition agreements where employees have access to employment with the private provider, but it's extremely difficult to guarantee the jobs, right? You can't really control another company's employment experience. The Board of Public Works could be dissolved or it could be retained as an independent authority, because one of the realities is you all would maintain a responsibility as a county over the long-term liabilities in particular, particularly as it relates to your Superfund sites. So that infrastructure needs to change. I don't know of any private companies that would be interested in purchasing that from you, but if you can find one, good on you. This is one of those areas that would require, from our vantage point, a full valuation of your existing assets. That would need to be confidential, right? So there are essentially a number of mechanisms to fully value the costs and liabilities and potentially identify what the sale price might look like. That should be a confidential process. Obviously, would influence a bid process that you would go through. But that's an immediate step should you all choose to move down this process. The main challenge is you lose flow control. So what does that mean? That means that what's attractive to private sector buyers with respect to your system is the tonnage. Being able to divert that tonnage to landfills potentially outside of the county, it would essentially result in you all choosing in a de facto way to essentially shift that waste that has historically been diverted to your waste to energy facility, for example, into landfill operations. It's that revenue stream that's really what's most attractive, which means your waste to energy facility would likely close operations, right? So that would be something that would be likely to be compartmentalized. There may be other alternatives that you can pursue through a creative bid process, but I would say a sale option would put your waste to energy facility, especially that loss of flow control, at risk. Could potentially lead to customer surveys. I think that's something that's really attractive. Can we drive down the cost to our customers on a day in, day out basis? And sometimes what we see is in the near term, whenever you move to a contract operations, there can be some initial savings. But once you get out of the business, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get back into the business. And then you're a bit over the barrel. So those price increases tend to come down the line, right? So, and again, you lose the ability and flexibility really to be able to manipulate and use your mixed solid waste collection system to drive your broader policy goals as a commission and as a community. Your current and future liabilities are really important to consider as part of the transition. So currently, there are a number of capital liabilities, your waste-to-energy refurbishment, PFAS installation, closed landfills, your rec bonds, contract termination costs. Those are about $80.4 million in estimated liabilities today, okay? There are also annual operating costs that you all would need to maintain if you exit the solid waste business. In other words, a number of staff and personnel would need to come over from an environmental remediation, monitoring, and compliance perspective, because you would still have those Superfund sites and liabilities that you would need to maintain. So there's some staff retention requirements there. And then annual operating costs as well, just in terms of some of your closed landfill operations and maintenance and PFAS leachate treatment. So those are recurring annual expenses. So it's not just about identifying a sale amount, it's identifying a sale amount as well as a direct revenue stream that allows you to maintain and fund these continuing liabilities going forward. Again, I mentioned there's a number of staff that would need to remain. I won't go into the specifics of each of these positions, but their fundamental role is really around environmental compliance and remediation. About 13 folks totaling about $1.2 million in annual expenses today, not including our lovely inflationary environment. So key conclusions with respect to the system sale is the liabilities do not transfer. So those environmental liabilities and concerns that you all maintain will be with you forever, I'm afraid. The waste-to-energy closure would create a fundamental disposal concern. Your South Kent landfill has about 5 years of capacity. Redirecting about 190,000 to that landfill is a fundamental problem and challenge. There's also 3 contracts that really bind any buyer. So your power purchase agreement with Consumers Energy, your operations and maintenance contract with Vicinity for the waste energy facility is through 2033 with 2 automatic 5-year renewal periods. And then your metals, $5 million has a termination penalty as well. And again, that valuation would be really a critical step to understand what's the potential value in real terms to a potential system sale. So, those are the 4 options that we've evaluated. We provided a technical memo. Feel free to spend time digging into it. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up as you're going through it. But as we completed the analysis, we had a number of conversations with both your leadership team at the county as well as the Board of Public Works to discuss and share our findings. We presented our findings to the Board of Public Works on June 4th. Which was really a detailed presentation. We didn't ask for any action. It was really just bringing folks up to speed and starting the conversation. We shared the technical memorandum and then came back last week to spend time with the Board of Public Works to talk about, all right, what path do we want to pursue? And ultimately, as Commissioner Burrow mentioned, the Board of Public Works passed an ordinance to essentially recommend that the county explore the independent public authority model as the preferred path forward for DPW governance, okay? So, and I'll ask those folks to share a little context about the conversation as we move into Q&A, but I want to talk a little bit about what explore a public authority means, all right? So what we have essentially done through this process up to this point is give you a strong indication of the policy and financial implications associated with each of these alternatives. We built the scaffolding, okay? It's really now time, we built the frame of the house. It's really now time to put the drywall up, the shutters, and the roof, right? So really building out an implementation plan, clarifying outstanding legal questions, clarifying specific financial implications with respect to your governance structure, your financial considerations, the legal review, building out a very specific implementation roadmap. We sort of think in Gantt charts. If you like Gantt charts, you're my people. We would essentially frame that out as a path forward. What's most important, though, as part of this process is not so much the specific steps that we need to take. It's the degree to which both the Board of Public Works and this board needs to be fundamentally connected through the process and the decision-making process, right? So it's as we develop and understand and put meat on the bones, having a recurring process where whoever is supporting you in this effort is in front of you. As a commission, we're bringing you along so that by the time you get to the point where that final decision needs to be made, everyone is operating from the same basic level of information, same education process, and we're in a position to make a good decision, good informed decision that would inform your vote associated with a path forward. So that is the Dog and Pony Show. I'll pause and give you all the opportunity to ask any questions or offer any discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan. Questions, discussion for Jonathan or anybody else? Yeah, please, Commissioner Faber.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll make a quick comment and then question around the system sale, and then I'll have some other things, I'm sure. So, I mean, First, I just want to make a general comment that our current structure has produced some pretty amazing results.
It has, yeah.
You know, when I worked for the Department of Public Works, I just didn't find people in the industry, at least not in Michigan, that were doing the things we were doing, partly because we've had bold leadership over 4 decades, and a model through the enterprise fund that has allowed us to move into that. I know that has created some tension, but I just want to recognize where we are. And, you know, I think we do have to overcome a bit of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as we kind of talk about this in the community, why we need to make this sort of transition. And I think there are reasons why. I just want to acknowledge, man, it's worked pretty great for our community and protecting public health and the environment. And then as it relates to sort of that system sale, when we looked at this a couple years ago, there were some cascading sort of impacts of that on recycling, and frankly, on one of our largest municipalities, representing about 1/3 of our county's population, that is also a municipal hauler, the city of Grand Rapids, and where would they bring their material? And they've set and aligned in their diversion goals to the county, or to, at least to the Board of Public Works. And there is sort of a, you know, there's costs and what we potentially are still on the hook for in liabilities, but there is a cascading effect, I believe. Did you look at all at the recycling center and kind of what the future of that would be in a system sale environment, or just it was nominal and we just kind of left it off the spreadsheet?
You know, I think
Thank
in
you.
terms of the broader consideration regarding the recycling center, that's more of a meat on the bones question, if that makes sense. But here's what I would say more broadly. The question of diversion, or the question of being able to effectively utilize a system that you all as a county have invested in over many, many years. You have the infrastructure that you've developed that gives you pathways that many municipalities and communities would be envious of. So when you talk about diversion, you talk about recycling, and I think most importantly, when you talk about organics processing, which is really the most significant opportunity with respect to diversion, you know, moving to a system sale essentially, in my view, would hamstring your efforts as communities, both at the county level and on the individual municipal level, to be able to execute those policy goals.
Thank you. Others? Commissioner Hennessy.
Thank you. I'm going to draw it back to a comment that Commissioner Ponstein made as we began our last meeting, and it really does come down to a sort of a philosophical discussion of what is the scope and role of county government. And as we continue to talk about moving things to authorities where we have that much less direct impact, I mean, I think that this really does raise a philosophical discussion here. And I, you know, think of Network 180, which moved to an authority system early in the 2000s. And, you know, think of everything that's happened and, you know, and the problems that have happened, and yet the lack of control that we sometimes feel we have over that department. The airport, it's worked pretty well, but the main controversy being who's appointed to this board to represent us as a Board of Commissioners. I could even look at the zoo in terms of, you know, the contract there and being an authority. And so there's no system that's going to be without problems. And so, you know, at the risk of going, if it ain't broke, why fix it? You know, I do sort of rate, what is the role of county government in all of this? And, you know, what is so compelling that we need to fix it, especially by moving to an authority where we really will not have the control. And I was curious about the statement too, that it would have, would leverage the AAA bonding of the county during the transition. And well, during the transition, or what does that mean? How long is the transition? Do they lose it then? And I also, if we don't change state law, who do we go with in terms of an authority type thing? And what will their role and their level of control be over this authority then? if it's, you know, if we stick, if we are forced in some way to stick with existing state law.
So I'm happy to try to take a cut at a few of those questions and
Okay.
give you some context. So in terms of the bond rating, that's relatively straightforward to answer. That's not something that you would lose. So in other words, when you talk about building out your articles of incorporation, which is a process that defines governance, that defines financial arrangements, that defines all those specific details, making sure that there's a firm link so that the authority would continue to have that relationship. So not just in the transition period, having that as a systemic option. Now, one of the things that could happen over time is the authority could develop its own credit experience and its own rating to minimize the need to draw upon that. That would take time. That's a bond attorney's question, and I'm afraid that's happily outside of my expertise. So in terms of that specific question. Now, the question of the kind of control and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. One of the things that's really important to walk away with is the process for how you design the authority board is very much a deliberative process, and there's all sorts of flexibility in what that looks like. So how your Board of Commissioners is represented in that role, the degree to which you all are connected to the authority, where other stakeholders and viewpoints can be able to engage, there's still that pathway and that opportunity. What we're trying to create, and to be frank, it's a highly technical operation. It's an operation that requires long-term investments that are of a very high dollar amount. And it relates to a significant regulatory environment that is ever evolving, right? What we're trying to do is create consistency and technical guidance and technical governance that allows you all to operate outside of the 2-year cycle with respect to election turnover that has, to be frank, created decision latency regarding some significant investment needs within the organization.
Commissioner DeBoer, did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Hennessy?
If we don't change, if we aren't successful or don't change state law, bringing in this other municipality, talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, you would have to find a partner, and that could really be any municipality within the county. It could potentially be a broader regional partnership too, but I don't think that's really something you all would want to pay attention to at this point. But creating that partnership, it's really, all right, who do we want to have a partner with? Their board would also have to vote on the development of the authority. So it creates a little bit of an implementation obstacle. But who that is, that's open to discussion, it's open to negotiation and conversation. So I think what we will want to do as part of the implementation plan is, all right, what are the advantages? Who's interested? What are the things that they would bring to the table in terms of partnership? And what are the expectations with respect to how the authority would operate? And do they mesh well with what your all's expectations are as a board? So that's an intergovernmental conversation. I can't name specifically who the partners would be and whether they're interested. I think that would be an ongoing conversation.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask one more.
Sure.
One more follow-up to that, and that is when I was sort of glancing at your list of those existing authorities within Michigan, some of them had like the eastern half of this county, or would we possibly end up with, having multi-jurisdictions or multi-organizations within the county? I really was taken by the fact that sometimes it wasn't county-wide authorities.
Yeah. No, I don't think that we would advocate for that approach.
Could it happen?
There's nothing in the legislation that precludes it from happening.
It'd be up to us to figure out how that would,
That's right.
would or wouldn't happen. I don't think anybody else is going to come in and be like, oh, you have to have an East and West Kent authority. But you're talking about counties that are, make up half the population of the state of Michigan. So it makes sense for those communities to have multiples. I don't think it would make sense for ours. That's my read on it anyway. You good, Commissioner?
Well, there is the urban-rural divide in terms of philosophy and this
I'm not sure
particular
what
issue.
you're talking about.
Or potentially. Anyhow, I think it raises a lot of questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner DeBoer.
Thank you, Chair. I'll help you with the urban-rural divide. So my preference would be to get rid of it entirely, and give it to a private entity to deal with. But I realize that a lot of our hesitation with that is our long-term liabilities. And I can respect that and understand it, but have we done our due diligence to at least look and see if there are any buyers that would be willing to work with us that would also consider some of our long-term liabilities? And, I mean, we've been able to run this department and haven't had to take general revenue dollars, so I'm wondering if there's any partner out there, or if there just really isn't that, or that any buyer out there.
I'll let Jonathan follow up, but I'll just say that part of the impetus for this entire conversation from folks at DPW and in this building was to see if there's any path on that or not. I was certainly somebody that shared that approach. I think Commissioner Burrow was somebody that shared that feeling. I think the answer is no. That's not a realistic path forward. But I just want to say that, like, that was one of the things that we really wanted to get an exhaustive look at, like, as kind of a final look with this process. But Jonathan, I think you can follow up on that.
Yeah, so obviously that's one of the alternatives that we wanted to explore in some detail and really identify what are the true implications, right? Now, as I mentioned, the process of having an independent valuation that's confidential is a critical part of that determination. And that's, I would say, potentially a worthwhile effort to go through. You know, there are conversations with respect to your private haulers regarding potential interest. Those aren't binding conversations, right? The only binding conversation that happens with respect to a system sale is essentially a bid document and a proposal, right? So what we've articulated is what we believe are the fundamental obstacles and the likelihood that you would be able to meaningfully accomplish your goals through a system sale. We believe that it is unlikely. Could you go through a bid process and determine if someone is willing to purchase the liabilities? I would be surprised, but it's certainly an effort that you could go over. I would say it would extend the process by 18 months.
Can I have a follow-up? I realize that for going forward, flow control is nice to have in place, but I also want to make sure that we are considerate of the rural areas who are still quite frustrated with flow control. So I just want that to be in the formula as we consider in our deliberations.
Thanks, Commissioner. As a follow-up question, Jonathan, would it be fair to say, in my recollection of when we looked at a preliminary review of this, would it be fair to say that we certainly could find someone who would be interested in acquiring a piece of the system, but one of the real barriers would be what we could get out of that, and then not being able to, there isn't really a path for the county to give up its statutory obligation to
Correct.
the whatever mess is left behind from landfills and et cetera. So we certainly could tell someone else to run some or all of the system for us, but I guess adjacent to Commissioner Hennessy's concern about the governance structure, there'd be very little oversight, if any, from the county as to how the operation would run, and yet we would still maintain the liability that we'd have underlying. Am I off base or am I close?
Your standard haulers are primarily going to be interested in the waste stream, not the waste to energy facility, not the liabilities. You all would maintain those liabilities, right? Making sure where you would lose the ability to influence and adjust the revenue stream associated with necessary to support those liabilities in the long term. It also doesn't give you many mechanisms apart from general fund, frankly, to manage the unanticipated liabilities that may come from future environmental considerations. So, there are fundamental risks and challenges. Could you, evaluate whether someone would be interested in sort of in you paying them for the liabilities? I mean, that's a broader conversation. I would be, again, very surprised. It's not a model we see a lot of nationally.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to call on Commissioner Ponstein, and then we'll do a first over there. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, no, just a quick thing. I mean, we're ruling out the sale because of the liability. We're selling something, there's money exchanged. And I know private sector, when things like that happen, they take that money, set aside, invest it, and that's gonna cover the liability. None of that money from the sale is gonna go to the county to use for other things. It's to protect the liability of the taxpayers.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll come back to Commissioner Faber.
Just to kind of, we talked about the liabilities of that. Also, a point in the report is costs will go up. Anytime we've looked at a system that went private, costs go down in the first year or two, and then they start to go up because that provider no longer has guardrails, really. We lose our place at the table by having given the responsibility over, and there's a profit. And they're reporting ultimately to stakeholders, shareholders, sorry, not community stakeholders. So I've seen it, when we looked at it, it's demonstrated communities that go this route will see their costs go up.
Thank you. Others? Commissioner Pakla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jonathan, I've appreciated the depth of the report here. Can you remind me, when we look at the liabilities, and we look at those ongoing costs of, roundabout at least $1 million a year, but maybe up to $3 or $4 million a year, depending on what happens with the staffing, are there external funds coming in from the state of Michigan or from the U.S. federal government to cover those requirements to, maintain the Superfund sites or to mitigate PFAS? I mean, I'm thinking about those liabilities as potentially unfunded or maybe totally unfunded at this point in time. So the notion of having them come out of our general fund is completely accurate, is that right?
That is accurate. So I will say this, when I look at liabilities or I look at how you fund a commitment long-term, I am always extremely reluctant to rely upon the federal government or the state government's good graces with respect to grants to fund your obligations. They're nice to get when you can get them, but building a financial model around that expectation is not something we would do.
And then, and those are just based on those costs are based on our currently known liabilities, right? So
Correct.
the next PFAS that comes along, the next mandate that comes down from US EPA or EGLE, those are additional things that could be put upon, a burden put upon the county to maintain or to mitigate that we would potentially have no
And
system.
to determine a funding source for.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Okay, all right. That's helpful, thanks.
I'm interested, I would come right to you, Commissioner. Just as a follow-up to Commissioner Ponstein's question, as I ponder it more, Jonathan, I know it's kind of a big question to answer, but is there any value, or I don't want to say any value, I'm not trying to devalue the point that you made, but I'm interested in just unpacking that, because is there any potential way that you could you make enough revenue off of a sale? And I know we haven't done the full evaluation, but is that theoretically possible or not, that you could have a pot of money that could help pay for the liabilities? I just wanted to kind of give that a little more due consideration. I hadn't necessarily considered it from Commissioner Ponstein's perspective.
Yeah. So is it possible? Anything's possible, right? Is it likely? I think the important question is if you are going through an asset monetization process, which is essentially what this is, and it's intended to generate a significant upfront amount of revenue, right? What do you give in exchange for that? In terms of long-term commitments, in terms of the specific levers that you lose as a governing body to influence the policy outcomes and influence the financial outcomes. So I think you could frame your goals with respect to a sale in all sorts of ways, and understanding what your valuation looks like, understanding fully what your liabilities are and what the potential pathways are. That's a process that you could go through. You could go through the bid process. I can't speak to what that bid process will yield. I would say you'd want to be extremely careful and thoughtful about how you would structure the bid process, and it can be challenging to fully anticipate those alternatives. So I can't speak to what's possible. I think likelihood is the question, and I think what you would give up for a larger upfront sale amount would be a concern.
Thank you. I had LeGrand next. Commissioner Learen.
Thank you, Chair. The four scenarios are really well laid out and really very helpful to us, I think, in thinking about this. And I love it when anyone says our biggest potential is with organics, because I still feel very frustrated that we're not doing more than we could to divert those. But to me, the I understand the push to change what we're doing, and I have huge concerns about the possibility of selling it all and privatizing it. Thanks for making me have more nightmares than I would about a scenario like that, for laying it all out there, because it's very, very troublesome. But what I come down to is a county department versus a standalone authority, which kind of seems to me like maybe too much control for the Board of Commissioners versus not enough control for the Board of Commissioners. And I wonder if you can, if you can sort of get into some of the nuances there between really direct supervision of a county department versus this standalone authority. You know, $600,000, like, wow, that doesn't seem like that much money to set it up, but we do have some of these problems with authorities that we set up. How do we know that we've got a meaningful oversight, meaningful ability to change, to affect direction versus, we really don't want to be this deep in trash, so to speak.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
I think it is a reasonable objective to strive for greater independence for technical expertise and long-term planning within the solid waste operation. I believe that is a need, okay? The question of how you all as a commission can still have authority or be connected to the operation as ultimately elected members of the county, right? There are lots of alternatives in terms of reporting, in terms of how you are engaged, in terms of what performance indicators look like, what strategic planning looks like, and the degree to which you are involved. There are mechanisms that are collaborative mechanisms that you can build into the article of incorporation. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there. Now, the ability to ultimately decide or override decisions of the authority, that would be lost, okay, under an authority model. Now, one of the things that's important to kind of consider with respect to creating a full county department versus an authority, as we frame out what the implementation pathway would look like to create an authority, potentially moving to a county department is an off-ramp that you can consider at really any time, right? So there's as you really flesh out, okay, here's really when you really get in the weeds in terms of what the relationships look like. Here's what the alternatives are. That's a big part of the implementation process. All right, here's what to look at. Here's what's important to everyone in this room, members of your community. All right, let's be creative with how we can structure these articles of incorporation to solve some of these challenges that you're talking about. And if you can't get there in a reasonable way, this is why it takes 18 months, getting those kinds of decisions at multiple milestones, right? If you can't get there, there's an off-ramp. Right, so again, I think the two options are not mutually exclusive. But I think the challenge with the full county department model, I've articulated that on a number of issues. I think the concern really is it doesn't necessarily, from my vantage point, clearly solve the long-term technical decision-making considerations that need to occur.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Commissioner Steck.
Thank you, Chair Green. So I think that Commissioner Ponstein, Commissioner Hennessy, and I were the only ones that lived through this debate back when we looked at the airport authority. And a lot of the questions that we struggle with here are reminiscent of the things we looked at then, which is, control over the operations, or letting go of control by the board in order to enable an authority to be liberated to run with the technical and unique space that airports work in. I mean, that was the same balance that we struggled with then. And I recall coming in thinking, no, there's no way I'd agree to an authority. I'm not going to give up that $1 billion asset. But at the end of the day, I concluded it was a more effective model that had much more promise in managing the future of that airport. And I think that's turned out to be so. But it's the same thing here, which is, we have degrees of authority here, and we can continue to do that. We could bring it in-house. I think we could do that too. But if you look at where we are now in the management and the direction of where we're going, we're really moving this into a more countywide, multi-jurisdictional kind of activity. I also recall sitting down with Steve when he was not a commissioner, but the frustration of the whole activity development at the DPW board and then having to redo everything at the Board of Commissioners level. And it's a complicated, clunky kind of methodology that we have in running the DPW now because of that. So can we obtain better efficiency in allowing an authority to do it? It strikes me that the same kind of promise that we had with the airport is available to us here on this. And so I supported it at the DPW level, that it's worth strongly developing out the model before we make the final decision, but that it has significant promise for enhancing the ability of that management, that governance, to be able to develop in this technical space in a way that the Board of Commissioners can't or wouldn't. At the same time, I think it gives us an opportunity to bring our key constituents to the governance table in a more effective way. Yes, we do appoint some now, but being able to go to representatives of the 6 cities and the rural, the townships, and really give them full governance participation and authority is an asset. It's a valuable possibility here. Avoiding the duplication of having to go through decision-making at the DPW and then coming back here in a more highly political environment. We're not very highly political, but partially political environment, I think is an asset that makes it worth pursuing. I do consider, and we talked about that at the other level at the DPW, I don't think the option of an authority carries with anywhere near the ability to just wash our hands of it at the board. We just can't do that. The Board of Commissioners would continue, if it's a single entity, we have all appointment responsibility for the governance. And even if it's a multi-jurisdictional, can we go back and get our favorite building authority as our other member?
It's technically a municipality.
Yeah, we did it with the insurance, didn't we? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, well, that's another bridge to cross later. But at any rate, you have the ability to do significant level of appointment of the governance there. We're still going to have to be responsible with respect to ordinances, right? Because authorities can't pass ordinance. We'd still be responsible for that. Already pointed out that to the extent that there are major projects to be bonded, I suppose the authority could, in theory, bond on their own strength, which isn't very likely to be very big. So it's still likely, like the airport, to come back here for the bonding, so we'd have that engagement. And then I suspect we have to still deal with the ownership issue. Who owns all the assets? Do we continue to own as we do with the zoo, or do we dispossess? I'm frankly, and maybe that's a question for Brian or whoever, I'm not sure you can dispossess ownership and still have an ordinance. But we can deal with that later on how we do that. So we're not going to wash our hands entirely, but can we accomplish a sufficient standalone operation that makes it more effective, more efficient, and achieves our goals more effectively? It certainly, to me, it looks like it could work, and I think we need to flesh it out and find out what it would ultimately look at. With the sale idea, the liability strikes me as it's a guaranteed liability. I think it's $3.5 million a year right now we pay just to monitor those things. That comes out of the enterprise fund operations now. If we sell, that has to come out of the general fund. I mean, if we don't have a source of revenue, it's probably going to have to come out of there. We're going to have to spend another $1.5 to $2 million just for the monitoring obligations that we have anyway. So now you're up to $5.5 million. That's before you get to that next PFAS level, because I agree with you, Jonathan, no one's going to buy our liabilities. We don't have enough negotiating power here to sell them. So they're going to sit here with us, and we're going to have to come up with another $5, $6, $7 million out of operations every year just to cover what we know now. I get it, we could sell everything, but waste to energy is where we have a lot of the asset value. No one's going to buy that waste to energy facility. I mean, it's already have a life that's ending in 2040 pursuant to to the state legislature's decisions. So it doesn't have any lifetime, and we don't have operators out there that are particularly interested in doing it. The big haulers aren't interested in doing that. So you're going to lose that asset value probably right off the bat. Other assets, you know, does Waste Management need our assets? Probably not. I mean, you know, we get pennies on the dollar. So I'd be shocked if we had a big pot of money out of a sale that says we can fund our $6 million additional cost for anything more than a year or two. But anyway. So my thinking at the DPW was it is a model that's well worth fleshing out and developing and see how well we can do it. And if we can't do it, Al, it's your job.
I get it. Yeah, you can do a quick follow-up.
Yeah,
Only because I'm giving you leeway because you run that board.
I think Al's comment was, I can do it, but do I want to, type of thing. What was your comment,
I
Al?
can do it, but I don't think it's the best idea.
But can I follow up real too on Commissioner DeBoer and Ponstein's comments too? Is I think whatever numbers we need to find, we need to get you that information. If it is sale information and it's somewhat of I wouldn't say, a loosey-goosey good guesstimate, right? I mean, those are items that we all need to help make our decision, right? But do know is if we do go the private route, they will bury trash. I mean, that's the cheapest, right, is to bury trash. So if we want to do better than just bury trash, we are going to have to pay some more for it. And again, everybody else everybody else has their own opinions on that, and I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong, but those are things you have to think about yourself. Is burying trash the right thing to do, or do we want to try to divert? And again, I think we gotta figure out what our constituents want, what they elected us here, and if you wanna go one route, again, I don't think it's right or wrong. I think you can make that decision, but just know, we'll be burying trash, and that comes at a cost too.
Did you want to follow up?
Yeah, just quickly, I did want to mention that the study does indicate that if you look around the nation, an authority is by far the most common organization method used for this type of operation. Also, as I think of liability, I think in terms of PFAS being one of over 15,000 chemical organic compounds. And so, do any of us think that there won't be another one popping up one of these days? And so I think that the liability is going to be, we think we know the liability for what we have, but when you think of another potential 15,000 organic compounds, I don't know that anybody could accurately pinpoint what our future liability might be.
We're at about quarter after. I want to make sure we don't take up too much of everyone's time, but we'll continue on with discussion for maybe another 10 minutes to try to wrap up if we have that much. I've got a bunch of people in line now. Stack's got. Okay, Commissioner DeBoer was next, then we'll go Pakla, then Ponstein, then Stack.
So, thank you, Chair. It seems to me that we could set up a buy-sell agreement how we want. We don't need the money down necessarily right now. We need to cover our long-term liabilities. So if we were to set up, I'm not saying this is the best the best way to move forward. I'm just saying there are ways to set up creative buy-sell agreements where we can make sure we try to cover our long-term liabilities, at least the ones that we know of right now. And so rather than just saying, oh, that's impractical or impossible, yes, I would like us to uncover those stones and see if there are any partners out there that would be willing to consider it. Maybe that's not the realistic option, and that's fine, but I would like to at least have that peace of mind to be able to say, no, that's not an option going forward.
Commissioner Pakla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The quick question, and then a real quick follow-up, is there specific action or outcomes that either Al or you, Mr. Chair, would like to have from this? Is there any sort of feedback you're looking for us in terms of direction to move forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would put that back to Al. I kind of had a question about what our next, what Al might envision the next steps for the Board of Commissioners would be as one of the wrap-up things here, so I can put that to you now.
Yeah, I think that the hope was, where we're at with this whole process, is that if there's sufficient support from the Board of Commissioners to fully vet out the authority option, that I would recommend that the Board of Public Works extend Raftellus contract, have them provide an outline of where, kind of a timeline and outline with benchmarks of what that looks like. There's just a lot of work to do to get to the point of making that decision. And if there really isn't that support, I'd rather know it now than after spending more money and a lot of time to develop that, what that looks like.
That's helpful. The commentary I just want to make is that, Commissioner Steck and I have both thrown out numbers about the liabilities. In the report, though, we just indicated the annual operating liabilities. There are a significant number of other liabilities that we would need to cover in any sort of system sale. The total that's estimated in there is about $80 million. So when we think about the bonds that we are currently obligated for, when we think about the refurbishment that we have committed to as both a Board of Public Works and a Board of Commissioners here, just from a scale perspective, we'd also need to be thinking about covering $80 million initial liabilities plus the ongoing operational liabilities. And that was a number that was presented to us a few times in the Board of Public Works that I didn't see in the presentation today, but think is really relevant to this conversation.
Thank you. Commissioner Ponstein.
Thank you, Chair Green. Just a couple of short points. We talk about the liability. We assume that a liability at the Kentwood landfill and the other one, when the county was flush with money, had all this money, said, well, we'll take care of it. Well, we've got to take care of it. And if it means it comes out of the general fund, it comes out of general fund. But we've got to look at this option. The county shouldn't be in the landfill business. Let the state of Michigan worry about this problem. For the unknown liabilities out there, well, if there's all of a sudden a new liability that they find that the landfill is causing, well, I'm sure there'll be lawyers lined up to sue whoever did that or made that liability kind of a liability now. But the other thing is when we get rid of it, that's taxable land again. So instead of the county getting those taxes, put the money in the revenues from these sold property and assets and put it towards the liability fund. But I think the look, it sounds like everyone's ruled out the private sale, but we got to dig in deeper to see if this is possible. Because, like I said, this is a state of Michigan problem, not counties. And it's something that's been passed on, underfunded. The state's telling us what we can and can't do, increasing our costs. Let's just give it back to the state because they know better than us.
Thank you, Commissioner Ponstein. Commissioner Steck.
My point was a clarification of process at this point. I think, Jonathan, you're telling us that for the Board of Commissioners to disband the DPW, which would be involved certainly in a sale, and to make a decision to sell the major assets would require a 2/3 vote of the Board of Commissioners.
Correct.
Right. So as we look at what do we need from the board to know what direction we go, first of all, it is inevitable it's going to have to be a bipartisan conclusion at this point, and a direction. And 2/3, what's 2/3 of 2114? So this has to be something the bulk of the board ultimately concludes is the way to do it.
All right, I don't have anybody else in the queue. I'm going to do last call. Commissioner Faber.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair. So just as I think forward to making a decision on this, there's really three things that I'm hoping come out of this process as we move forward. One, that the process sort of goes at the speed of trust, meaning we're really meaningfully engaging our municipal partners in this discussion. I don't want to, we have kind of two potential pathways for an authority, the change state, the state statute route or finding municipal partner. I'd really like to have a positive, benefits-oriented discussion with our municipal partners, because there are potential partners out there that have assets that may make a lot of sense to be part of an authority. And I just don't want to run past that opportunity. And part of that too is we know we will hear from our municipal partners if that process didn't adequately include them as we go through. And so I don't want to be in this room in a year and a half, 2 years, making a decision and have township supervisors and city managers and here saying, wait a minute, you didn't really ask us, and what are you doing? And here's how this is going to negatively impact my community. So whatever that process is, you know, I think this is such an important inflection point for us that I just really want to see a process that pulls those partners into the discussion. One, as it relates to actually creating a multi-jurisdictional authority, but two, even if we were going alone, to your point, Commissioner Steck, there's an opportunity here. We looked at the governance structure of the BPW 2 years ago. We changed that to include municipal, you know, over 30,000 people below. You know, that was an attempt to start bringing those voices into the decision-making room, if you will. And I think that's going to be vitally important as we go forward. My second is really that, you know, I want to see that this model, this change, actually does brings us to our goals more effectively, efficiently, faster, better, stronger. That we have our materials management plan. My understanding is that's in its final stages. That is the state saying you, county, have to achieve a 30% recycling rate. And this model, whatever we do, you know, the form has to follow that function. We do not have the luxury of saying, hey, we're going to sit around here and settle for 10%. We know that there is not only a stick that the state has as it relates to that planning process, where we and our municipal partners won't be eligible for certain funding if we don't have a plan that we can implement. And then also the carrot, that there will be resources available for us to move in that direction if we do. So whatever this sort of turns out to be, you know, to Commissioner Burrow's point, this is a path towards more diversion. This is a path towards alternatives to landfilling. And I really appreciate your comments around sort of, this is highly technical, and it does require generational thinking. When we commit to a new landfill, that's a 90-year decision that we make. That is not a good decision to make on 2-year election cycles, right, or 4-year election cycles. And then finally, as it relates to governance, I think I related to that. I think Commissioner Hennessy said it well. We have different authorities that some would say, you know, have really adequate kind of connection points, and some that we feel are off to the races and, you know, only come to us when they need a bond. And, you know, how do we find that right mix? And so, you know, as we move forward, that's going to be another point that I'll be looking at as we kind of think about this. I think I talked about that a bit in the process point, but that, you know, whatever we land on in the governance is, again, really designed to carry us towards our goals and have those appropriate connections back to the county board, because ultimately, to Commissioner Steck's point, we are the ones that have the ordinances that help this all happen. We are the ones that have to make sure we're covering those long-term costs. We have a surcharge. We have things that are still in, you know, our bucket over here. That also, to me, you know, when I first heard this authority model and this, like, finding a municipal partner, what concerned me about that was that the liabilities were going to come along with it. And I was like, well, who's going to sign up for this mess? Like, why would anybody join us in this work? If those stay over here and we know we have those covered and, you know, however we do that, then I think we could have a really positive discussion about who else would like to be a co-owner in this work with us. And I think that would be a really exciting opportunity and discussion. So sorry for the long-windedness. Really, my 3 points there are really good process, that we're aligned, that this really helps us achieve our goals, and we can demonstrate the why we would do this as it relates to that. And then third, that we have a really robust governance discussion that ultimately creates something that has those appropriate linkages back to us as decision makers. Thank you for the leniency and the time.
All right, thank you, Minority Vice Chair Faber. I'm going to give Commissioner Burrow the last word, and then we'll do adjournment.
All right, thank you, Chair Green. Just a couple things. I want, if we have a general consensus today that we'll move down to the authority model, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that commissioners shouldn't be getting all of their questions answered. Totally eliminate the idea of a sale for a couple commission. I mean, you need that information to make the ultimate decision. So even though we're going down this path, we have to have your questions answered, and I want those answered. So again, this is gonna be a long process. I want this to be right. I guess maybe this is a question for Al or Dar. I guess I'd like a general place where if commissioners have questions, I'd like them to go somewhere where they're getting answers. Now, a few of us should probably be looped into those questions, but I want their questions answered. I don't want there to be any hesitation when this vote comes down the line. So I want some general point person, if possible. Hi, Dar, thank you.
I would suggest that the vetting go through the county administrator's office, and then whether it's Reftelis or Public Works or other expertise within the county or outside the county help inform that. That's my thinking, but I would look to Al for that.
I think that would work well. I will suggest that I have Lori Latham take the lead in taking those questions and making sure everybody knows what the questions and answers are as those come in. We'll have kind of a living FAQ, if you will, and then we can build that towards a good database for whatever decision-making time comes ahead.
Lori, you're welcome.
Very briefly, Commissioner Hennessy.
I just wanted to ask what kind of a timetable you're looking at? What is the
I'm
what is the
certainly not in a big
process? What
hurry. As the
timetable?
chair, I don't, we haven't discussed that recently. I don't want to lose the momentum that we have from the work that the DPW board did, but I also don't want to move, too quickly with this decision.
We had talked about, well, first I think the DPW would need to, and the BPW would need to work on the contracting relationship to move forward. We were thinking about a year to fully vet it and get it back. We're thinking, and that might involve, just different steps like reinvigorating the stakeholder group to meet and talk. We had good representation when we were looking at the sustainable business park. So I think, but that would all be laid out in a process that would go to you much quicker or shorter, maybe within, I don't know, a month and a half to get a full process laid out. And then with an expectation that we'd be back here in a year with a recommendation. But there'd be points of information along the way. It isn't like see ya, and then all of a sudden we're back with a bunch of new stuff.
You can go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, so one of the things that we are paying attention to as part of this process is what is really important for each of you to know as we move through the process. And I have started thinking about what an overall process looks like to make sure that you all as individuals have your questions answered, and that anything that's outstanding, when you get to the decision point, you have a clear understanding of. So, my primary task to walk away is to give both your Public Works Director, Lori, Al, a framework for what I think would make sense, that respects the process, right? It's really about engagement, about those stakeholders, that it has consistent touch points with you all as analysis sort of becomes more and more formalized. So that feedback loop is critical so that when you get to a decision, there's no surprise, right? That's the ultimate goal of the process, and we'll help frame out in our experience what would make sense.
All right, great, thank you. Commissioner Halstead.
Thank you. The information's great. Just to confirm, so if we're looking a year out, does this affect our '27 budget in any way other than perhaps if we hire them on to continue on the process?
Well, it would be DPW hiring them to continue with the process. So as far as the county general fund budget, I would not see an impact.
I would agree. Our 27 budget actually is set already. We'll be working on 28 soon. But we have the funds set aside to help fund Raftellus and any other consultants that we might need to bring around the process.
Last thing I'll say on the timeline, and then we'll move to adjournment. I don't want this to carry on through too long where we're looking at another board being elected. Some of us will be on that board and some of us won't. But we're at almost at the midpoint of this term. I don't want to have to hand this off to another group that hasn't been doing the work. So it's a good timing on that front. All right, with that, we will continue on. There are no commissioner comments. I really think we might drop that from these meetings. With that, we are adjourned at 11:30. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your work.